real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Coming up later in this show, Dogman in the Hamptons. But first, the Werewolf and the Jogging Club. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story from Wisconsin for you about the Wisconsin werewolf. This happened during the pandemic, when some other seniors and myself decided we wanted to get out and exercise more. The TV was telling us to stay home. The TV told us to wear masks in public. But we were rebels. We all formed a jogging club. We got up before dawn, we met in the park. We stuck our stupid, useless masks in our pockets. And we jogged very lightly and somewhat slowly through the park each morning. While our neighbors were putting on weight and getting health problems from it, we were taking weight off and getting in better shape daily. Until the Dogman incident, that is. The Dogman incident is sort of what changed everything. That was the strangest morning of my entire life. I'm not that good at telling this story because it makes me feel strangely emotional, but I will do my best to translate my memories into a coherent storyline for you. I guess I should just start right in with the setting itself, which still makes me feel panicky when I think about it. I have had multiple nightmares about it. I was very shaken up by this when it happened, or at least the tail end of it. So we were mostly ladies, and the three men in our group were actually the eldest and therefore the slowest. If someone had ever decided to attack us, there wouldn't have been much we could do about it, other than get attacked. Fortunately for us, though, most people were brainwashed into staying home in those days, and apparently the muggers were included in that brainwashed group. So we were the wild. We were the free. We were the grannies and grandpas out reclaiming the dawn. We weren't only getting back into shape. We were watching the sunrise each morning. Each morning it wasn't rainy anyway, and we were feeling much more alive than we had before starting our club. But of course our happy times were leading to a head-on collision with the Dogman, or the Wisconsin werewolf. Some of the ladies I know call him that. I feel this was an animal though, not a magical creature. I don't think he scared us and then went home and became Dr. Jekyll again or whatever. I'm pretty sure this was just an animal that is very rare, possibly even a mutation. One of the gentlemen who was in our jogging club who has since passed on was of the opinion that the creature was a mutation. He used to say that if Dogman were a normal species, we would have found out where they lived by now. We would have one in a zoo somewhere, or else we'd at least have the DNA. If the Dogman is actually a mutation of some other creature we are already familiar with, like a wolf on the one hand or a bear on the other, then even if we found the DNA evidence, it would just look like the DNA of the already known species that it was mutated from. And his theory also would account for why there are so few of them out there. Even if you assume every Dogman report is true and real, and I would not make that assumption, but even if every single report were real, there are still a lot fewer sightings of this creature than there are sightings of wolves and bears. So maybe it's not actually its own species. Maybe it's a mutation of a known species. I have no idea if that theory has any merit, but I do admire how neat it is. It explains a number of mysterious things about the Dogman or the Wisconsin werewolf, all in one theory. So I often return to it, but it is still just one theory of many. I just think it's one that should get more airtime, so I'm passing it on for my late friend, who could no longer tell people the theory himself. The morning of the werewolf began like any other for us. It was later October and the weather had started to get chilly. The leaves were mostly still on the trees, but had turned color and begun to fall. We met in the dark, waited for the entire group to show up, then began our very leisurely jog on a fairly level track running through the woods near us. There is one bit of a hill on that track, but it's near the beginning. We'd start off super duper ultra slow, knowing that the hill was coming up early on. Once we got over that hump though, we'd go from super duper ultra slow to just ultra slow. And it was during this ultra-slow segment of the jog when one of the men in the rear first noticed the Dogman behind us. He alerted one of the other runners to the creature, which was by then walking along the edge of the woods behind us, easily keeping pace with his long legs. When I had the creature pointed out to me, I nearly fainted. It did not look like a man in a costume to me. It was walking on legs that had dog feet on the bottom, not human feet. If that were a costume, there would need to be room for human feet inside that skin, and yet there was none. I'm leaving out the most striking feature of this creature, which was that he was holding a jack-o'-lantern in his hands. Yes, he was holding a pumpkin that had a face carved into it. I don't know where he got it from or if he made it himself, but this is what we all saw. People were murmuring that it was a mugger wearing a scary costume, but my glasses were less fogged up than theirs, I guess, because I assured everyone that we were dealing with an animal. I didn't know what kind of an animal it was, but it was not a costumed person. When the creature took to the road and trotted up to join our group, we moved out of his way and kept jogging around him. He jogged with us at our pace, panting like how a dog would pant. He was not behaving in a hostile way at all, and some of the others started to jog closer to this creature. Not me, mind you. That creature was over 6 feet tall and it was strong looking. I didn't want to accidentally bump into it and have it unalive all of us in a moment of surprise and rage. But some of my friends, they just didn't care. They just wanted to see this creature more closely. They still say, when remembering this morning, that he smelled like a wet dog. They think that's funny, but what else would he have smelled like? One of the ladies started asking the Dogman questions, assuming he was a werewolf. She asked him who he really was, who he turns back into when the werewolf spells are over. She asked if he was someone we knew. He just kept jogging. She began to make guesses, asking him directly who he was. Are you a relative of any of us? Are you my cousin Jack, the one with the unibrow? Are you my divorce lawyer? It was like that. The creature never answered. I doubt that he understood he was being asked questions, but my friend was convinced she could see him answering each question by his body language. What I remember was his body language was that he was jogging slowly, the same as the rest of us. I thought about stopping and letting the others go on without me. That way I could get away from that creature before something horrible happened. The thing is, once I slowed down, I realized the sun still wasn't up very far in the sky, and I would be alone in the dark forest. I didn't know that there weren't more dogmen out there in that darkness, and so I just did my best to keep up with the others, but keep myself as far from the werewolf as I could. I remember envisioning all sorts of ways this might play out that would not be pleasant. If the creature began attacking my friends, for instance, what would I do then? If I ran into the woods, I might be able to get away. On the other hand, I might trip over something in the darkness and do the Dogman's work for him. And so I just kept doing the same thing as the others. We were all hoping that we still somehow had strength in numbers, even though we could now number the Wisconsin werewolf among us. I began to see glints and flashes of the sunrise breaking through the tree cover, which was growing sparse because it was nearly November after all. I began to hope that this situation might resolve itself, when suddenly a car backfired somewhere to the right, somewhere unseen to us. In shock, the Dogman dropped his pumpkin, which smashed on the jogging path, and then he took off into the woods. I don't know what he thought that loud noise was, but he didn't seem to understand it was just a car backfiring. The group of us kept running and got out of that forest as soon as we could manage. We had not planned on disbanding the group, and we didn't exactly break up anyway. We just sort of went out less often, and we never went back to that path through the woods. Our main excuse for not going out as much was the cold weather, but in reality I think it was the fear of that big hairy muscular monster jogging alongside of us holding a jack-o'-lantern in his massive clawed hands. Anyone watching from a distance might have thought we were all friends with him. They might have pointed and laughed and said, "Hey, look, there goes the werewolf and the jogging club." Dogman in the Hamptons. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a story from my long-lost youth of encountering a dogman or a werewolf. He was very humanoid except he had a dog head, or wolf head maybe. I wouldn't really know the difference. He was covered in fur like a pup, but he was like a man where it counted. And these dubs I was with in those days, they liked him. They weren't scared of him. Or they weren't scared enough. Granted, the creature we all saw was 6.5 to 7 feet tall, and he was all muscle. This was a perfect specimen, I have to admit. A perfect specimen of what, though, I can't really be certain. This was not in some rural place like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, darling. This happened in the Hamptons, at a very exclusive Halloween-themed beach party. I don't remember exactly where this was, to be honest, but that's not really my scene. It was way out on Long Island, and it was a fairly big house with its own private beach out back. It was some rich bachelor's birthday party which happened to fall on or near Halloween, and he was connected enough to know how to hire a dozen girls from my agency to go down there to party with him and his rich friends. I used to hate those gigs. It felt borderline like being an escort, which was the business I had gotten out of in order to get into modeling in the first place. At any rate, it was in that atmosphere at a private beach party behind this big house with a bunch of snotty models and snottier rich dudes that I had my one and only single solitary cryptid experience in my life. Some people tell me I saw a werewolf and not a dogman. That could be true, I would have no way of knowing. But since I am also not sure where we were partying, because I forgot the name of the town decades ago, I also am not sure how far we were from Plum Island. I mean, this creature might have been a government experiment, right? If you think about it. Or maybe he was a local werewolf who decided to wolf out and crash a model party, I don't know. So what I do remember was that I saw the werewolf or dogman as he walked around this sort of natural partition between this property and the next one over. Kind of like some raised land that served as a kind of natural wall, giving the people on both sides more privacy from each other. At least that's what I remember it looking like to me when it was dark and I was flying on whatever was in those magical potions they kept handing me and encouraging me to swallow down. And into that scene walked this big hunk of a man. And this big hunk of a man walked around that sort of rocky, sandy hill. And I tell you, his body was quite different from that of the soft, rich guys at our party. This was not a group of guys that looked like they even belonged to a gym. But this tall guy heading toward us, well, he looked like he walked there directly from the Olympics. The word athlete flashed into my addled brain, and I started wandering toward him, wondering what sports team he belonged to and what his yearly salary was. When I got a little closer, though, I could see that he had a wolf or a dog head, like I told you earlier, and I grew disappointed. I was like, oh well, those muscles are probably foam and on the inside of his wolfman costume. I gave up on him and went back to the main party to find something to relieve my boredom. While I had my back turned, however, some of the other snipes had caught sight of the two-legged dogman, and they didn't seem to care if he was a freak wearing a costume. They just noticed that he was a well-muscled freak wearing a costume. I felt a twinge of jealousy, and I re-examined this guy that I had already rejected. The muscles moved naturally. They did not look like they'd been sewn inside his costume. In fact, it didn't look like he was even wearing a costume. But he had to be. So that meant this was one amazing costume. That was the way I saw it. I decided I wanted to go in closer and look for his zipper, if you know what I mean. Figure out how that costume worked and how it looked so real. After all, this was Halloween time, and it was the Hamptons, so it's not like somebody would wear a dime store costume. Not to a party like this they wouldn't. I was like 20 maybe at the time, maybe not even that, and I found a way to make it all seem logical in my head that this was happening. So did the other girls apparently, as a crowd was gathering around the creature or man or whatever it was. The men were being ignored, and the monster was grabbing all the attention. And that's not all he grabbed. As I recall, he became fascinated with a jack-o'-lantern and picked it up. The lit candle inside had a flame that danced, and the dogman seemed entranced by this. Then he tucked that pumpkin under his arm, like he decided this was his now, and he resumed walking, surrounded by some of the top print models of that era. Soon these dummies began competing with each other, trying to get the creature's attention. In their defense, I think we all still assumed this was a really tall guy in great shape under all that fur. I mean, there was, but we were all still thinking it was human. And I don't think this was a man we were seeing. I think it was a beast. I remember feeling contempt for my peers, behaving in such a craven way, throwing sisterhood out the window for some guy that we couldn't even be certain was human. They were being so immature. I was ashamed of them, and so I began moving through the crowd, pushing the girls away from the monster. Soon we were all fighting over him, pushing and shoving to get closer to him, tearing each other's dresses and ruining each other's hair. In our fight, we lost sight of one big thing: the Dogman himself. It seems that while we were fighting all around him, he squeezed and squirmed his way out of our group and out onto the part of the beach by the water. When we saw this, we all screamed and ran toward him. I took my shoes off so I could run better on the sand. I was trying to get between that monster and the ladies, and I was trying to hold the others back from him. I looked up, and I'll never forget the moment when I saw a very canine expression on that creature's face. He was seeing us all running toward him, and he was worried about this. You've seen dogs looking worried. Well, this was that. And I realized in that moment that no face mask was going to be able to change expressions the way I had just seen this mask do. Which meant it wasn't a mask. Which meant that this was a legit real monster, and I was running directly toward him. I was running into the arms of some man-eating cryptid. Once this reality set in and took hold, I dropped to my knees, which stopped me from running forward. And then, there on my knees in the sand, I let out a scream at the top of my lungs. And to my surprise, this freaked out the Dogman, and he yipped out a high-pitched doggy squeal himself. I continued to scream, and he did too. I'm not sure which of us was more scared of the other one. Well, I guess the Dogman was more scared of us models than we were of him, because he literally swam out to sea. I can't remember if we were by a lake or by the south shore of Long Island, so I can't tell you what he was swimming toward. Maybe he was swimming toward the mainland, or maybe the other side of a wide lake. It was very dark, and I was young, and I was drunk, and I was stupid. It was a longer swim than I would attempt, even back in those days when I was still in shape. So I have heard people tell stories on your show about running away from the Dogman. But how many people have told you stories of the Dogman running away from them? Or swimming away from them, I suppose. That particular Dogman did not like to have so much attention from beautiful women. I'm uncertain what exactly that says about him, or about us. But that's all I can remember about. Dogman, in the Hamptons. If you like this show and you're having a blast, be sure and thank Mary Shabazz. Please join us in thanking Mary Shabazz for making this episode possible. Mary is a top-tier channel member, and to explain more about that, here is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.